So, hello, I'm here to tell you why I wrote this book and about my experiences with shame about bodies and overcoming the shame and developing some strategies to fight shame, but thinking about it as a biologist and someone interested in occupational health. So I wanted to write this book for many years because when I was doing my work for the previous book and I mentioned some of the difficulties women had at work, some of my friends said I can't talk about the difficulties women have because then no one will want to hire women and I will be supporting discrimination against women at work. And of course I didn't want that, so I thought about it, but I decided that it was important to write about the difference between saying that women and men are not identical and saying that women should be disqualified from working. So I was thinking about that for a long time. And then as a biologist, I was wondering about occupational health and safety practice and whether the differences between women and men are sufficient to justify changes in our occupational health and safety practices. And then a third preoccupation, which I won't talk about much today, but which is important for our scientific work in general, is we as scientists don't know very much about how to treat data on women and men so that we can find out more about women's and men's occupational health. It's important to take account of sex and gender when we analyze data, but I have written about this in my scientific papers, but I won't talk about it now. So before we start, I should talk about the difference between sex when I talk about sex and when I talk about gender. When I talk about sex, what I mean is biological specificities of women and men, differences in size, proportions of our body segments, etc. I don't mean to say that all men are different from all women and that these differences are large, but I think we need to think about them. Of course, there are also differences that are absolute, such as men don't get pregnant, women don't make sperm. But, and so all this is part of what we mean when we talk about sex. When we talk about gender, we're talking about social roles, things that are very changeable over time and from one place in one community in one country to another. So differences in the job assignments, task assignments, in work activity, and so forth. Now that I've said this, I want to confuse you by saying that you can never completely separate sex and gender because the two interact. For example, body weight of women is usually lighter than men, and muscles of men are usually bigger. But of course, body weight is influenced by diet, and diet is influenced by social considerations, and muscle size is influenced by exercise, and exercise is influenced by social considerations. So sex and gender interact. Now, if we talk about sex in terms of occupational health and safety in the workplace, women and men have different shapes and sizes and aptitudes on the average, so that we need adaptation of tools, equipment, and work environments, and they need to be adapted to women and to men. There are also some physiological differences in how women and men metabolize some toxins, and also in how we calculate how they metabolize toxins, because usually we use some indicators from urine to say how much toxin is in the body, and those indicators can vary also between women and men. And then, as I said before, there are the reproductive differences that are very important and that the workplace can impact as well. In terms of gender, to go into a little detail, most women work in a very few sectors of the economy, and I think this is true in Korea as well. And women within workplaces, even if they are in the same workplaces, they may do very different jobs, and even if they are in the same job, they may be expected to do their tasks differently, to do different tasks, and they may do their tasks in different ways. And then, so in terms of social roles, women are more likely to be exposed to sexual harassment and sexism, although men can also be sexually harassed at the workplace. Women usually are, in both Korea and in Canada, women take more responsibility for the family situation on average, and this affects work schedules in particular. So when I was writing the book, I was not only influenced by scientific considerations about sex and gender, but I was also influenced by the Me Too movement, because when I was starting to write the book, in fact, it's 5 years ago this week in North America that the Me Too movement started. And I was listening to what was happening and remembering some terrible things that happened to me when I was a young girl and when I was a woman. And I started wondering why women feel shame when bad things are done to us and how to deal with it. And this applies to the workplace, because when we are smaller in the workplace, when our muscles are different, we start to feel ashamed of our bodies in the workplace. And this can affect our ability to fight for occupational health and safety. And I started thinking about that and how it influences our fight for occupational health and safety. So to start with a lesson in biology, a very fast lesson without very much meat in it, very much information in it, I just want to point out that when we learn about women's bodies and men's bodies, and our research is just beginning, but we learn that women and men are different in various ways, and it's not always that women are small men. We have different body proportions, so that in, for example, the body segment from the top to the middle among women is slightly longer in proportion than it is for men. We have different muscle mass on average and different types of fibers. There are slow twitch fibers and fast twitch fibers that react differently. And women are, in general, more gifted for endurance, for lasting a long time doing something. And men have more explosive force, which that's what it's called. It means that you can mobilize quickly and you use up your energy quickly, but you don't necessarily go on for as long. And different responses to fatigue, different responses to proprioception. Proprioception is how I know where my arm is in space in respect to my body. And what's interesting about proprioception is that women tend to think their bodies are smaller than they are. So we have a somewhat different perception of our body in space than men do. There are different reactions to noise among women and men, and different degrees of deafness in reaction to occupational noise exposure, which is an important thing that happens at work and very dangerous. People are in mice right now looking at differences in how pain is processed physiologically in the body by the immune system as well as the sensory organs. And so there are a number of differences between women and men that are emerging from the very little research that is going on. And the differences may not be large. There are certainly almost never absolute differences. That means that not all women are different from all men. But when we are designing for the workplace, when we're designing objects, when we're designing personal protective equipment, when we're designing work sites, we have to think about them, because otherwise the workplace will be more dangerous for women when the workplace is not adapted. So we saw this at least in North America during the COVID pandemic, because women's protective equipment, the masks, were not designed for women. And there's a wonderful book that you should read called Invisible Women, which has probably been translated into Korean. And it tells about how women die more often in automobile crashes, because the crash experiments that are designed to show when bodies will be injured were all made using statues of men in the cars rather than statues of men and women. So these are all considerations that we need to think about when we are designing workplaces to protect health and safety.
Okay, so when we look at the distribution of elbow height, for example, women are mostly shorter than men. And we can see that the curve for women is less than the curve for men. But that in terms of standing elbow height, there are a large number of women and men who are in the overlapping region of the curve. So we're not that different. But when it comes to hips, then women are, on average, they have bigger hips than men, although we have smaller waists. And again, there's overlap. But there's a consequence of the difference in hip breadth, which is shown by this woman, who is pointing out that her tool belt hurts her hips. Why? Because women have waists, and the tool belt will push down on the hips. And when there are a lot of heavy tools, then we can suppose that the tools will weigh on her hips and hurt her. And that is what we heard from these communication technicians, from this woman who was doing that kind of job, that her tool belt hurt. So I made a funny suggestion. I said, well, why don't we just put in a cross chest harness like this, and that will take some of the weight off your hips, and that will adapt your tool belt so that women can use it. And she laughed at me and she said, if I do that, my breasts will stick out and all the men will make comments to me, so I'm not going to do that. So we learn that there is resistance to women changing things, and that this is often, that sex is often used as a weapon to keep women from making these kinds of changes. And women react by being ashamed of their bodies and not wanting to draw attention to the differences between men and women's bodies. So this is a problem for women in the workplace. So that's why we should be thinking about sex. Why should we be thinking about gender? Is that, as I mentioned earlier, women and men have different jobs, different tasks, and different ways of doing the task. And there's a statistic that comes from North America, which is that for women and men to be equally distributed across job titles, more than half of all workers would have to change jobs. So there's a profound division of labor in the workforce. And I think from what I've read that in Korea, it's at least this, as much polarized as it is in North America. So we studied cleaners. There in hospitals, there were women cleaners and men cleaners. And what we learned was that women and men do different work activities during the workplace, during the workday. this is how much their bodies are in extension. So extension is when you reach up like that woman is doing in the picture. And women were more often in extension, reaching for high things. Men were more often in neutral postures. Women were more often flexed, much more often in flexed postures, bending over, crouching. And although men were more often in extremely flexed postures, greater than 45 degrees. So the work activity was very, very different between women and men. And if you looked at the numbers, women spent 83 minutes per day mopping. Men did almost twice as much mopping, whereas women spent twice as much time cleaning toilets. When we asked the men why they didn't clean toilets, they said, well, I don't do it at home. Why should I do it at work? Which is not a really understandable answer, since we do a lot of things at work that we don't do at home. But for food servers, that's waitresses and waiters in restaurants, we found an enormous difference in the number of steps they took during the day. Women were walking faster. They took 38 steps per minute compared to 21 for men. And even though they walked faster, they also walked more of the time, 27% of the time, as opposed to men who walked 15% of the time. So the women were really running around a great deal more. Now, people might say that's because women have shorter legs and women have to run around a lot to cover the same space. If I'm going from the table to the kitchen, and I'm a woman, I have to take more steps because my steps are shorter. But the step length, the stride length difference, the length in every step, is only a 10% difference on average between women and men. But women are doing more than 3 times the number of steps per day than men in food service. So why is that? How can we understand this tremendous difference in work activity between women and men? Is it a sex difference because of shorter legs? Not only, it's a gender difference as well. Well, one thing that's different is that in restaurants, the employers give more housekeeping tasks to women. The women clean the tables. They fill up the salt shakers and pepper shakers that we have in North America. They clean more. And the men are doing mostly just serving food and taking food orders. And this, by the way, is in the same restaurant. Exactly the same. But the other difference is that we have had a change in our habits. We used to carry all the dishes on trays, and then the employers figured out that if we didn't use trays, then we wouldn't need a place to put the trays down, and therefore we could have another table or two. And that would save money because there would be more tables in the restaurants that could fit customers. So we no longer use trays to carry dishes back and forth from the kitchen. So then the length of your arm becomes a very important parameter, because it's how many dishes can you fit on your arm when you are carrying dishes that have food in them to and from the tables. And that was an important reason why women had to go back and forth to the kitchen many more times. And the other reason is that in Canada, anyway, we have tipping as a practice. That is, you get extra money if your customer likes you. They give you some extra money at the end of the service. And in order to get more tips, you have to deal with more customers. So you're being paid per hour, but you're also being paid a little extra by each customer. So that means that women and men want to serve as many customers as they possibly can. But there have been studies done, and it has been shown that women make much less money in tips than men. People give men more money. And the other thing is that people give women money in relation to their beauty or the size of their breasts. So that women who are not so beautiful or who have smaller breasts have to run around a lot more to make the same money as a man. So that's another reason for the different work activity. So I'm showing that work activity is a function both of sex and of gender, and they interact. So because of all these differences, the effects on health are also different. And what we find is that there is a division of labor that gives to men all the jobs that look difficult, and look scary, and look dangerous, and look unpleasant, visibly unpleasant. So it's not that men have an easier job than women. They don't. Men have more accidents. They have more exposures to toxins. They have more exposures to noise. They have more injuries at work, and they have some kinds of occupational illnesses more than women. Among women, there are some specific toxic exposures and some kinds of accidents that women have more than men. But they are less visible than the accidents and exposures that men have. So when it looks scary, when it looks unpleasant, when everybody can tell that it's a very dangerous thing to do, then we send men to do it. When it's a danger that is hidden, like in nail salons where the solvents that are used can be poisonous, but it looks pretty because they're all pretty colors, then women are exposed. In what's called non-traumatic musculoskeletal disorders, which is repetitive strain from doing the same thing over and over and over again, like those women who are moving the cookies around on a big platter. Those women don't look like they're doing something hard, but in fact, they have a lot of carpal tunnel syndrome, a lot of epicondylitis, because they're moving very, very fast and they're timed. So that kind of non-traumatic musculoskeletal disorder, women have 50% more than men, 1.5 times more than men. And again, there are not only sexist and sexual harassment, but other psychological risks, like not being appreciated, not being respected at work. That kind of thing is still dangerous for your health, but it's not visible, and women have more of those risks. During COVID, what we saw also was that there are risks from being in contact with clientele, so that women have a higher risk of seroprevalence of COVID, meaning that they've been exposed to COVID. And in North America, racialized healthcare workers, women who are Black or Hispanic or Asian, in fact, were 2.3 times more likely to be exposed to COVID. So there, and also to be exposed to the kinds of aggressions that you have during a pandemic, and you are a healthcare or a service worker when everybody is feeling very, very scared, and they want to get angry with somebody, they're going to get angry with you. So that kind of thing increased as well. So why is there this gender division of labor? We were collaborating with some people in France, and they were asked by a printing house, a place that made books and textbooks and cookbooks and that kind of thing. And they were called in by the printing house. The printing house is saying, we're not going to hire women anymore because they all are getting too many accidents and illnesses. So an ergonomist looked at the work and looked at the company records. And the company records turned out to be very well kept, so he was able to go back for some years. And what he found was there was a distinct division of labor where women were doing the kind of job where you were actually manipulating the books and putting the books together, carrying them around. So you were doing a lot of weight carrying with your hands. And when they looked at a graph with the length of employment by sex, what you see on this graph is, my mouse doesn't want to show it to you, is that among those who are younger and whose length of employment was shorter, there were many more men. And as people get older, there are fewer and fewer men and many more women who stay on the job. This is because the employer had a policy of not promoting women. And the reason that they did that was that the men didn't like to have women in authority over them. And so as the years went on, there were almost all women staying in these jobs. And when you have a job where you can see where you're carrying heavy lumps of pages in your hand, and it's putting a strain on your wrist, if you do that for, in this case, something like 40 years, you're going to have musculoskeletal problems. So that the reason why the women were having more musculoskeletal problems than the men was because of the jobs that they did. So we explained this, or the team explained this to the employer. And the first thing that happened was the women burst into tears. They were crying because they were happy that this had finally been recognized, that they had real problems. They were not just imagining them. They were not just lazy. They were not just having menopause, but it was the workload. And they pointed out that over the previous 10 years, the number of books they handled had gone up by 5 times, but there had been no change in the number of women, so that really they were understaffed. And the employer did make some changes so that there would be more women. But the management did not want to change one thing, which was the task assignments. They still refused to promote the women. And in fact, there was a lot of resistance to the findings of the study. And we found that this resistance is very common. So why is it common? One is the fear that the males in the company will feel accused of sexism, and they will get angry and they will have revenge. And this is something we come into every time we study women in non-traditional jobs, women in jobs where there's a majority of men. There's a lot of fear of making the men angry, so that it becomes a little bit of a vicious circle. The men make terrible remarks, but the women don't want to react to them because they are afraid that the men will get even angrier. And there's also the realistic sense that why are we making a fuss when men are exposed to visible, scary, obviously unpleasant conditions? Why are we complaining about our little problems? Except that our little problems are also making us sick. Some of these problems could be solved if we could have good discussions about them. And in Canada, the union movement has tried to have these discussions, but we usually have only about a half an hour of free time that these kinds of discussions can take place. And the time is lacking to go to the bottom of complicated issues. People tend to react very emotionally, and by the time the emotions are dealt with, it's time to go on and do something else in your union meeting, because unions have a lot of other urgent priorities. Another obstacle to taking sex and gender into account in the workplace is that women are ashamed, as I was talking about earlier. We feel that we shouldn't be smaller, we shouldn't be weaker, we shouldn't get pregnant, we shouldn't have dysmenorrhea, we shouldn't have menstrual cramps, and we shouldn't complain about harassment. or if we complain about harassment, that just means we must have done something to provoke it. So we have this shame, and then we also are afraid to ask for what might be considered special treatment for women. For example, there's a whole controversy about whether women with heavy menstrual cramps should be given a menstrual leave when the cramps are disabling. And why would this be special treatment? And there's two answers to that. One answer is that many times dysmenorrhea, menstrual cramps, hurting when you have your period, is in relation to workplace conditions. When conditions are very cold, women tend to get more cramps. When work schedules are disrupted, women tend to get more cramps. So it would be normal if you have a reaction to something in the workplace like that you should have a leave because of it. But women are ashamed to ask for a leave because it looks like special treatment for women. And I like these pictures at the bottom of the screen because they show what the difference is between equality, equity, and adaptation, which is here, this is equality here, where everybody's being treated equal, but the shorter person can't see the game. So then you introduce a compensatory measure and everybody can see the game, but this person is still exposed to more danger because they have to stand on those boxes and the boxes can fall. So what's best to have as a solution is something that makes everybody really equal. And this is not special treatment. This is making a situation equal for everybody. And that's what we would like to see. So how can we overcome the obstacles? Well, one of the stories I tell in the book is that there was a study of these two people. This is a woman and this is a man. They were working together on the same piece of equipment. This is a place where they repair train engines. And they are working on the same engine at the same time. And you can probably tell why it is only the woman who got shoulder problems and had to take leave, sick leave for her shoulder problems. It's that she's working at this angle and he's working at a more comfortable angle. So one thing you can change is changing the height of the working surface by putting in some kind of adaptable housing so that she can stand higher. But another thing was that when they were spending most of their time tightening bolts on this engine, which you do by with a wrench. And she was much slower. She was 40% slower than he was. So that meant that she was spending more time using her shoulders to tighten the bolt and less time with her shoulders not working. And he was being relaxed during more of the workday. So again, she was getting more shoulder pain. But then when the ergonomist came in, when Julie Corville, who was working with us, saw this, she got the woman a wrench that was twice as long. And then she was faster than he was by 60%, and her shoulder got better. So this was something, and this was true even though she weighed half as much as he weighed, and even her strength was less than half as much as his was. We could do away with the difference in an enormous difference in size and strength just by adjusting the tool. So this would be the perfect solution. But she could get the longer wrench, but if she insists on getting it, she will get in trouble with her colleagues. And we've seen this many times when we've suggested, for example, that communications technicians get special shorter ladders. The foremen, the supervisors say, no, we don't want to give you special treatment. And or there are obstacles like what I talked about before, when women needed an adjustable tool belt, but it would have made their breasts more visible. And they were ashamed of having breasts because they would be harassed more by their male colleagues. So what that means is that we can't just change the workplace technical aspect. We have to change the social obstacles at the same time. What can change? Well, in my own life, my colleague Donna Mergler and I were the first biologists in our biology department. We were the 2 women and there were 17 men. And you'll read in I think it's chapter 9 of the book of some experiences we had with our male colleagues who really, really wanted us to stay apart. We learned eventually that we had to stick together, we had to support each other, and we had to share our experiences honestly and openly. And that way we could become more powerful and we could face up to our colleagues and we could win such battles as starting the first course in biology of women's health in our university. We started a research center that is 90% women. We helped build support structures for women in occupational health, like an association. We did many, many things, just 2 of us sticking together and supporting each other, so that sharing our experiences and building our teams help us to lose shame and gain strength. Also, we were helpful in building and helping build some institutional structures. And I don't know if you have these in Korea, but we have an agreement with trade unions and community groups, which means that we can train and we can do research with these groups under circumstances which make our lives as professors easier, and then it gives help to the union and the feminist community groups. We get paid to do this. The projects are approved by the community university committee that judges whether this will be a helpful project and whether it will be decent research. And the university employs coordinators who know about how to make professors able to listen to community requests and to understand them. And it's been 50 years for the union agreement and 40 years for the agreement with women's groups, and they're extremely successful, both for the community groups and the unions, which like them very much, but also for the professors, because we get new ideas to do research on, and it makes us also become more original. So I wanted to say that just in case in Korea this is a possibility. So what we can say is, in response to the Me Too movement, what can we say about occupational health is that women workers need not to be ashamed of being women and not ashamed of our bodies, so that we can recognize the things that happen to our bodies, our own very own bodies, that are women's bodies in the workplace, that we're not ashamed of our strengths and weaknesses that may be different from men, and not ashamed of what we've done or of bad things that happen to us. And we are able to stand together with other women to change our work. We are able to name the bad things that happen to us and name those responsible. All these things will make us stronger and have made us stronger. And I know that there are a lot of people in Korea that are working on these things right now. And I have a great deal of respect for all of you who are being so active in the universities, in the unions, in the militant groups to change women's and men's work to make us all healthier people. So my conclusion is that women and men are both exposed to dangerous conditions at work. They may be different. They may impact our bodies differently, but we're both exposed to dangerous conditions at work. There are obstacles to changing this in knowledge gaps, in equipment, in mentalities, and in work practices. Occupational health scientists and practitioners and militants, activists can generate useful knowledge and make constructive suggestions, working in teams, working in solidarity. So let's do it. Thank you.